In the executive parking lot of a multi-billion-dollar aerospace corporation, CEO Victoria Hayes pointed at a rusted Mustang and laughed. "That car is junk," she announced to the circle of senior leaders surrounding her. The man who owned it stood silent behind the crowd, a 35-year-old black janitor in faded work clothes, just another invisible employee. But then he stepped forward, slid into the driver's seat, and turned the key. The sound that erupted made the entire lot go silent. What was hiding beneath all that rust? The innovation showcase had been Victoria Hayes's idea from the start. She wanted her executives to see what success looked like, what ambition could buy. The parking lot of Hayes Aerospace gleamed under the morning sun. Rows of electric luxury vehicles lined up like soldiers at attention. Tesla Model S sedans, Porsche Taycans, a Mercedes EQS that cost more than most people earned in 3 years. Each car represented power, status, the kind of wealth that separated leaders from everyone else. Victoria stood at the center of it all, her tailored navy suit sharp enough to cut glass. At 42, she had inherited Hayes Aerospace from her father 5 years ago, and had spent every day since proving she deserved it. The company was worth billions now, a leader in aviation technology, and she made sure everyone knew who was responsible for that growth. Her heels clicked against the asphalt as she moved between the vehicles, pointing out features, sharing price tags like they were badges of honor. The senior leadership team followed her. Vice presidents, division heads, chief officers whose combined salaries could fund a small country. They nodded along, laughed at her jokes, admired each other's vehicles with the casual ease of people who had never worried about money. This was their world. Clean, expensive, exclusive. That was when Victoria noticed it. At the far edge of the lot, tucked into a corner near the service entrance, sat a car that looked like it had been dragged out of a junkyard. A Ford Mustang, maybe from the early 2000s, with rust creeping up from the wheel wells and patches of primer showing through faded red paint. The hood was dented. One headlight looked cloudy. It sat there like a stain on an otherwise perfect canvas. Victoria stopped walking. Her smile shifted into something sharper. She turned to her assistant, a young woman named Rachel who carried a tablet and never seemed to sleep. "Whose car is that?" Victoria asked, her voice loud enough to carry across the group. Rachel glanced at her tablet and tapped the screen a few times. "It belongs to Jake Sullivan. He works night shift maintenance." "A janitor," Victoria said, and the word hung in the air like an accusation. She looked back at the Mustang, then at her executives, and something sparked in her eyes. An opportunity. A moment of entertainment at someone else's expense. "Well, we can't have that eyesore ruining our showcase, can we? Rachel, go get him." Rachel hesitated for just a second, long enough to register discomfort, but not long enough to refuse. She disappeared into the building. The executives waited, some of them already smirking, anticipating whatever was about to happen. Victoria crossed her arms and stared at the Mustang like it had personally offended her. A few minutes later, Rachel returned with a man in his mid-30s. He wore the standard maintenance uniform, a grey shirt with the Hayes Aerospace logo stitched over the pocket and dark pants that had seen too many washes. His skin was dark, his build lean but strong, the kind of frame that came from years of physical work. He kept his eyes down as he walked, his hands shoved into his pockets, and he moved with the careful quiet of someone who had learned not to draw attention. Victoria raised her voice so everyone could hear. "Is that your car?" The man looked up. His name was Jake Sullivan, though Victoria did not care to remember it. He nodded once, his face carefully blank. "That car is junk," Victoria said, and a few of the executives laughed. She gestured toward the Mustang with one hand, her tone dripping with mock concern. "I mean, look at it. It's falling apart. Do you even have insurance on that thing? Or are you just hoping it dies before someone notices?" More laughter. Jake stood there in the center of the circle, surrounded by people in suits worth more than his monthly paycheck. He did not respond. He just stared at the ground, his jaw tight, his shoulders stiff. Inside, something else was happening, a memory clawing its way to the surface. He was 25 again, standing in a different office, surrounded by different people in suits. These ones had been lawyers. They had smiled at him the same way Victoria's executives were smiling now. Predatory, amused. He had been holding a folder full of blueprints, his life's work, a design for a hybrid engine that could change everything. He had trusted them. They had destroyed him. Victoria took a step closer to Jake, enjoying the attention. "I'm just curious. Why would someone drive something like that when they work at a place like this? I mean, we have standards." One of the vice presidents chimed in. "Maybe he's saving up for something better. Or maybe he just doesn't care," another one added, and the group laughed again. Jake lifted his head. His eyes met Victoria's for the first time, and there was something in them that made her smile falter for just a fraction of a second. Not anger, not shame. Something colder, something patient. "You want to see if it runs?" Jake asked quietly. The lot went silent. Victoria blinked, thrown off by the question. She had expected him to apologize, to shuffle away embarrassed, maybe even to beg for his job. She had not expected this. "Excuse me?" she said. Jake repeated himself, his voice steady. "You want to see if it runs?" Victoria looked at her executives, then back at Jake, and her smile returned. This was even better. "Oh, absolutely. Let's see what that piece of junk can do." The group shifted closer, forming a loose semicircle around the Mustang. Jake walked toward the car without another word. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the door handle, a detail no one noticed. He slid into the driver's seat, the worn leather cracked and soft under him, and wrapped his fingers around the steering wheel. The interior smelled like oil and memory. He closed his eyes for just a second. "For Mia," he whispered. Then, even quieter, "For Sarah." He turned the key. The sound that erupted was not what anyone expected. It was not the rough sputter of an old engine struggling to turn over. It was not the grinding cough of a dying machine. It was a deep, steady roar, smooth and powerful, the kind of sound that came from precision engineering and years of careful work. The engine hummed with a perfect rhythm, a low growl that vibrated through the asphalt and into the bones of everyone standing nearby. The executives stopped laughing. A few of them exchanged glances, confused. One of the senior engineers, a man named Thompson, who had spent 30 years designing jet engines, stepped forward, his face tight with concentration. He tilted his head, listening, and his expression shifted into something close to disbelief. Victoria felt it too. Something was wrong. This was not the sound of junk. This was the sound of something extraordinary. Jake sat behind the wheel, his hands still gripping it, his eyes fixed on the dashboard. The engine purred beneath him, flawless, every cylinder firing in perfect harmony. He had built this. He had spent 10 years rebuilding what they had taken from him, piece by piece, in the silence of his garage while his daughter slept upstairs. This was not just a car. This was proof. This was survival. He turned the key off. The engine died, and the silence that followed felt heavier than the sound had been. Jake opened the door and stepped out, his face still expressionless. He did not look at Victoria. He did not look at anyone. He just walked past them, back toward the building, his footsteps quiet against the asphalt. No one spoke. Victoria stood there, staring at the Mustang, her mind racing. That sound, that impossible, perfect sound. It should not have come from a car that looked like that. It should not have existed at all. Thompson finally broke the silence. That engine. he said slowly, almost to himself. That wasn't stock. That wasn't anything I've ever heard. Victoria turned to him. What do you mean? Thompson shook his head, still staring at the Mustang. I mean, that sounded like next-generation propulsion, hybrid tech, maybe beyond, I don't know, but it shouldn't be in a car like that. Victoria felt something shift inside her chest. Curiosity, unease, and something else she did not want to name. She looked back at the building where Jake had disappeared, then at the Mustang sitting alone in the corner of the lot. Rust and primer, dents and scratches, junk on the outside. But underneath, something worth far more than she had ever imagined. Victoria could not stop thinking about the sound. 3 days had passed since the showcase, and she still heard it in quiet moments. That deep, flawless hum. The kind of engineering that should not exist outside a research lab, let alone inside a rusted Mustang owned by a night shift janitor. She sat in her office on the 42nd floor, staring at the city below, and felt something she rarely experienced. Uncertainty. She picked up her phone and called Thompson directly. He answered on the second ring. I need you to find out everything about that janitor's car. Victoria said without introduction. I want to know what's under that hood. I want specs, analysis, everything. Thompson sounded cautious. You want me to approach him? No, Victoria said quickly. Just find out who he is first. Background check, employment history. I want to know why someone like that is working here. She hung up before he could ask questions. Rachel appeared in the doorway a moment later, tablet in hand, already anticipating the request before Victoria could speak. Jake Sullivan, Rachel said, reading from the screen. 35 years old, started working night shift maintenance 3 years ago. Clean record, no disciplinary issues, single father, 1 daughter, 8 years old. Victoria frowned. That's it? Nothing before Hayes? Rachel scrolled further, her expression shifting. There's a gap. About 10 years with no employment records. Before that, he was enrolled at MIT and Stanford. Engineering programs. Specialized in propulsion systems and internal combustion redesign. Victoria stood up so fast her chair rolled backward. What? Rachel turned the tablet around. The screen showed academic records, scholarship awards, a thesis proposal on hybrid engine technology. The photo attached was younger, the face leaner, but it was unmistakably the same man who had stood in the parking lot 3 days ago. Why is someone with that background working as a janitor? Victoria asked, more to herself than to Rachel. Rachel tapped the screen again. There's something else, a patent filing from 10 years ago. Sullivan submitted an application for a next-generation hybrid engine design. It was contested by a corporation and tied up in litigation. The case was settled out of court, but the patent was never granted. After that, he disappeared from public records until he showed up here. Victoria felt something cold settle in her stomach. Which corporation? Rachel looked at her. It doesn't say. The records are sealed. Victoria sat back down slowly. 10 years ago, her father had been running Hayes Aerospace. He had been expanding aggressively, acquiring smaller firms, swallowing up patents and technology to keep the company ahead of competitors. She had been in graduate school then, learning the business from a distance, trusting that her father's success was built on vision and hard work. She had never questioned the methods. She reached for her phone again and called the head of legal. I need you to pull all acquisition records from 10 years ago. Focus on patent disputes, settlements, anything involving propulsion technology. The lawyer tried to protest, but Victoria cut him off. Just do it. Today. She hung up and stared at the tablet Rachel had left on her desk. Jake Sullivan's face looked back at her from the screen, younger and full of something that was no longer there. Hope, maybe. Belief in a future that had been taken from him. Victoria spent the rest of the day waiting. Thompson sent preliminary findings by early evening. He had used audio analysis software to break down the engine sound from the parking lot. The report was 6 pages long, filled with technical language that Victoria only partly understood, but the conclusion was clear. The engine produced an acoustic signature consistent with hybrid propulsion systems that were still theoretical in most of the industry. Efficiency ratings suggested output levels far beyond current commercial standards. If the technology could be replicated, it was worth billions. Thompson had added a note at the end. "This isn't something you buy off a shelf. Whoever built this knows more than our entire engineering division." Victoria set the report down and looked out the window. The sun was setting, painting the city in shades of orange and red. Somewhere out there, Jake Sullivan was finishing his shift, mopping floors and emptying trash cans, hiding a fortune under a layer of rust and silence. She made a decision. She would talk to him, not as a CEO looking down at an employee, but as someone who needed to understand. Victoria found him 2 hours later in the parking garage. The night shift was ending, and Jake was walking toward the Mustang with a canvas bag slung over one shoulder. He moved like someone who wanted to be invisible, his steps quiet, his head down. Victoria called out to him from across the lot. "Mr. Sullivan." He stopped but did not turn around. Victoria closed the distance between them, her heels echoing in the empty space. "I'd like to talk to you," she said. Jake finally looked at her. His expression was unreadable. "About what?" "About your car," Victoria said. "About what's under the hood." Jake turned away and kept walking. "I don't have anything to say to you." Victoria followed him. "I know you went to MIT. I know you worked on hybrid propulsion systems. I know you filed for a patent 10 years ago." That made him stop. He turned around slowly, his face hardening. "Then you know enough to leave me alone." Victoria shook her head. "I need to understand. That engine, it's not just impressive, it's revolutionary. You could be working at the top of this industry. Instead, you're here, cleaning floors. Why?" Jake stared at her for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice low and cold. "Because people like you destroyed me." The words hit harder than Victoria expected. She opened her mouth to respond, but Jake was already walking again. This time, he led her to the Mustang. He unlocked the door, popped the hood, and stepped back. "You want to see it? Go ahead." Victoria moved closer. The engine bay was nothing like the exterior of the car. Every component was meticulously crafted, custom built, fitted together with the kind of precision that took years to achieve. The hybrid system was integrated seamlessly, a combination of electric motors and a redesigned combustion chamber that looked like it belonged in a prototype lab, not a 20-year-old Mustang. She reached out to touch one of the components, then pulled her hand back, suddenly aware of how little she understood. "This is extraordinary," she whispered. Jake leaned against the car, his arms crossed. "It's all I have left." Victoria looked at him. "What do you mean?" Jake's jaw tightened. He looked away towards the far wall of the garage, and when he spoke again, his voice was flat, like he was reciting facts he had repeated too many times. 10 years ago, I was 25. I had just graduated and started working as an intern at a small engineering firm. I spent 2 years developing that engine design. Filed for a patent. Thought I was going to change the world." He stopped, and Victoria waited, her chest tight. "A week after I filed," Jake continued, "a big corporation reached out, said they were interested in buying the technology, offered me almost nothing. I said no. 2 weeks later, they sued me, said I had stolen the design from work, that it belonged to them under my internship contract. The contract I signed was supposed to cover only basic admin work, but they had altered it, added clauses I never agreed to. I couldn't afford the lawyers to fight it." Victoria felt something twist inside her. "What happened?" "I lost everything. Jake said simply. My savings went to legal fees. My reputation was destroyed. No one in the industry would hire me after that. And my wife, Sarah, she tried to hold us together, but the stress was too much. She died in a car accident 6 months later. Doctors said she fell asleep at the wheel. She hadn't slept in weeks. Victoria's breath caught. She wanted to say something, to offer some kind of comfort, but the words would not come. Jake pushed off the car and looked at her directly. The corporation that sued me, it was Hayes Aerospace. Your father signed every document. The world seemed to tilt. Victoria took a step back, her mind racing. That's not possible. Jake reached into his bag and pulled out a folder. It was worn, the edges frayed, but the papers inside were still intact. He handed it to her. See for yourself. Victoria opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside were court documents, contracts, letters on Hayes Aerospace letterhead. Her father's signature appeared again and again. The dates matched. The case details matched. Everything Jake had said was true. She looked up at him, her voice barely audible. I didn't know. Now you do. Jake said. He took the folder back and slid it into his bag. This engine? I built it from scratch. Took me 10 years, working nights, using every spare dollar I had. It's the same design they stole from me, but better. And it's mine. The only thing I have left to give my daughter. Victoria felt the weight of it all pressing down on her. Her father's empire, her inheritance. It had been built on theft, on the destruction of people like Jake. She forced herself to speak. Let me make this right. I can buy the design from you, $5 million, and I'll give you a position as chief engineer. You'll have full control over— No, Jake said, cutting her off. Victoria blinked. What? I'm not selling it. Jake said, not to you, not to anyone. This car is all I have left of Sarah. It's the only thing I'm leaving to Mia. You can't buy it. Victoria felt frustration flare up inside her, mixing with the guilt. You're being unreasonable. That engine could change the industry. You're wasting it. Jake's expression did not change. I'm protecting it. There's a difference. Victoria wanted to argue, to convince him, but she could see it in his eyes. He would not budge. She had spent her entire life getting what she wanted through money and power, and for the first time, neither of those things mattered. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking sharply against the concrete. Behind her, Jake closed the hood of the Mustang and got into the driver's seat. The engine started with that same perfect sound, and he drove away into the night. Victoria went back to her office and did not sleep. She spent hours going through the legal files her team had pulled, reading every detail of the case against Jake Sullivan. The evidence was overwhelming. Her father had orchestrated everything. The altered contract, the lawsuit, the settlement that left Jake with nothing. It had been calculated, ruthless, and entirely legal. By morning, Victoria had made a decision. If Jake would not sell, she would remove the problem entirely. She called HR and gave the order herself. Terminate Jake Sullivan, effective immediately. Cite violation of company policy regarding personal property on premises. The HR director tried to ask questions, but Victoria ended the call. She sat back in her chair, telling herself it was the right move. Jake was a liability, a reminder of something ugly she did not want to face. If he was gone, the problem would disappear. 3 days later, her phone rang. It was Thompson, and his voice was tight with panic. Turn on the news, now. Victoria grabbed the remote and switched on the television in her office. Bloomberg was covering a breaking story. The headline scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Former engineer unveils $2 billion hybrid engine technology. Jake's face filled the screen. He was standing in front of a small warehouse, flanked by investors and engineers, and he was holding a press conference. The Mustang sat behind him, hood open, the engine on full display. This technology was stolen from me 10 years ago by Hayes Aerospace. Jake said calmly into the microphone. I rebuilt it on my own, and now I'm taking it to market independently. The camera cut to financial analysts discussing valuation. $2 billion. Possibly more. The stock ticker for Hayes Aerospace appeared at the bottom of the screen, and Victoria watched in horror as the numbers dropped. 10%, 15%, 20%. Her phone exploded with calls, board members, investors, lawyers. Everyone wanted answers. Everyone wanted to know how a janitor had just destroyed their company's market position in a single press conference. Victoria sat frozen, the remote still in her hand, and watched as everything she had built began to crumble. The board meeting lasted 4 hours. Victoria sat at the head of the table while 12 directors took turns dissecting every decision she had made in the past week. The stock had dropped 30%. Major clients were threatening to pull contracts. The media was running stories about Hayes Aerospace's history of patent theft, and journalists were digging into every acquisition her father had overseen. The company was hemorrhaging value by the hour. "We need a response," the CFO said, his voice sharp. "A statement, an explanation, something." Victoria stared at the polished surface of the table. She had spent the past 2 days searching for a way out, a strategy to contain the damage, but every path led back to the same truth. Her father had stolen from Jake Sullivan. The company she had inherited was built on a foundation of lies, and now that foundation was collapsing. "What do you suggest?" she asked quietly. The head of legal leaned forward. "We deny everything. We claim Sullivan's accusations are baseless. We tie him up in court for years if we have to." Victoria looked at him. "He has documentation, court records, my father's signature on every piece of paper." The room went silent. One of the older board members, a man named Harrison who had worked with her father for decades, cleared his throat. "Then we settle," he said, quietly. "Offer him enough money to make this go away." Victoria shook her head slowly. "He won't take it. I already tried." Harrison's expression hardened. "Then we destroy him, publicly. We find something in his past, something we can use to discredit him. We make sure no one believes a word he says." Victoria felt something break inside her chest. She looked around the table at these men and women who had spent their careers protecting the company, protecting her father's legacy, and she saw them clearly for the first time. They were not interested in truth. They were interested in survival, and they were willing to destroy another person to achieve it, just like her father had done. She stood up. "This meeting is over." Harrison frowned. "Victoria, we're not finished." "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "We are." She walked out of the boardroom and went directly to her father's old office. It had been converted into a storage space after his death, filled with boxes of files and records that no one had bothered to sort through. Victoria spent the next 6 hours going through them. Contracts, memos, legal correspondence, every piece of evidence confirming what she already knew. Her father had been ruthless. He had identified promising young engineers, waited until they filed patents, and then crushed them with legal power they could not afford to fight. Jake Sullivan had not been the only victim. There were others. At least a dozen cases over 20 years, all settled quietly, all buried under non-disclosure agreements and sealed records. Victoria sat on the floor surrounded by paper, her back against a filing cabinet, and felt the weight of it all pressing down on her. She had spent 5 years running this company, believing she was building something, but she had been maintaining a machine designed to exploit and destroy. She had become her father without even realizing it. The photograph on the desk caught her eye. Her father stood with a group of executives at some corporate event, all of them smiling, all of them successful. She picked it up and stared at his face. He had taught her that power was the only thing that mattered, That winning meant doing whatever it took, that people were either useful or obstacles. She set the photograph down and made her decision. The press conference was scheduled for the following morning. Victoria stood at a podium in front of more than 50 reporters, cameras flashing, microphones pointed at her like weapons. She had not slept. She wore a simple black suit, no jewelry, no makeup beyond what was necessary. She wanted to look like what she was, someone who had failed. She took a breath and began. 10 years ago, Hayes Aerospace, under the leadership of my father, stole proprietary technology from Jake Sullivan. The company used legal intimidation and fraudulent contracts to claim ownership of an engine design that Mr. Sullivan had developed independently. This was not an isolated incident. My father engaged in similar practices multiple times over the course of his career. I did not know about these actions while he was alive, but ignorance is not an excuse. I have spent the past week reviewing every case, and I am here today to take full responsibility. The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions, but Victoria raised her hand. I am resigning as CEO of Hayes Aerospace, effective immediately. I am liquidating my personal assets and establishing a fund to support engineers and inventors who have been victims of intellectual property theft. The fund will provide legal representation and financial support to help them reclaim what was taken from them. Additionally, I am reaching out to every individual my father harmed and offering whatever restitution I can provide. She looked directly into the cameras. To Jake Sullivan, I want to say publicly what I should have said in private. I am sorry. What happened to you was unconscionable. You deserved better. Your family deserved better. I cannot undo the damage, but I will spend the rest of my life trying to make amends. She stepped away from the podium and walked out of the room, ignoring the shouts of reporters behind her. Rachel was waiting in the hallway, her eyes red. That was brave, Rachel said quietly. Victoria shook her head. It was overdue. 2 weeks later, Victoria found herself standing outside a small house in a neighborhood she had never visited before. The address had come from Jake's employment file. She rang the doorbell and waited, her heart pounding. The door opened. Jake stood there, dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, looking surprised. What are you doing here? He asked. Victoria held up a folder. I wanted to give you this in person. It's the deed to the warehouse your father used to own, the one Hayes Aerospace seized during the lawsuit. I had it transferred back to your name. I know it doesn't fix anything, but it's yours now. Jake took the folder slowly, his expression unreadable. He opened it and scanned the documents inside. Why are you doing this? He asked. Victoria met his eyes. Because it's the right thing to do, and because I want to learn. Jake frowned. Learn what? How to build something without destroying someone else, Victoria said simply. Before Jake could respond, a small voice called from inside the house. Daddy, who is it? A girl appeared beside Jake, no more than 8 years old, with bright eyes and her hair pulled back in 2 ponytails. She looked up at Victoria with open curiosity. Jake rested his hand on his daughter's shoulder. Mia, this is Miss Hayes. Mia studied Victoria for a moment, then asked bluntly, Are you the lady who said our car is junk? Victoria felt her throat tighten. She knelt down so she was at Mia's eye level. I did say that, Victoria admitted, and I was wrong. Your car is a treasure, just like your dad. Mia tilted her head. Daddy says you hurt him. Victoria nodded. I did, and I'm trying to make it better. Mia thought about that, then disappeared into the house. She came back a moment later holding a piece of paper covered in crayon drawings. It was the Mustang, drawn in bright reds and blues, with Mia and Jake standing beside it. You can have this, Mia said, holding it out. So you remember. Victoria took the drawing carefully, her hands trembling. Tears blurred her vision, and she did not try to hide them. "Thank you," she whispered. Jake watched the exchange, his expression softening just slightly. He gestured towards the door. "Do you want to come in?" he asked. Victoria shook her head. "I don't want to intrude. I just wanted to deliver that and tell you something else. If you ever need anything, if there's anything I can do to help, you have my number." Jake nodded slowly. "I'll keep that in mind." Victoria stood and started to walk away, then stopped and turned back. "For what it's worth," she said, "you deserved better than what this world gave you, and your daughter is lucky to have you." Jake's jaw tightened, and he gave a small nod. Victoria walked back to her car, the drawing clutched in her hand, and drove away. 6 months passed. Jake's company grew rapidly, securing contracts with major automotive and aerospace firms. The hybrid engine technology he had developed became the industry standard, and his valuation climbed past $2 billion. The Mustang was eventually restored and placed in the Smithsonian Museum of American History as a symbol of resilience and justice. Victoria did not return to Hayes Aerospace. The company was restructured under new leadership, and she spent her days working at the foundation she had created. She reviewed applications from engineers who had been exploited, provided funding for legal battles, and slowly began to understand the damage her father's legacy had caused. She and Jake were not friends. They exchanged emails occasionally, mostly about foundation work or industry developments, but there was a mutual respect that had not existed before. He had offered her a consulting position at his company, and she had declined, saying she needed to earn the right to work in the industry again. On a warm afternoon in late spring, Victoria sat in a park near her apartment, watching children play. Her phone buzzed with a message from Rachel. It was a photo. Jake and Mia standing beside the restored Mustang at the museum, both of them smiling. Beneath the photo, Rachel had written, "Thought you'd want to see this." Victoria stared at the image for a long time. The car gleamed under the museum lights, no longer hidden beneath rust and dents. It was beautiful. But what struck her most was the expression on Jake's face. He looked free, unburdened, like a man who had finally reclaimed what was stolen from him. She set her phone down and looked up at the sky. She still had a long way to go. She still carried the weight of her father's sins and her own mistakes. But for the first time in months, she felt something she had not felt in years. Hope. Somewhere across the city, Jake sat in his office, looking at blueprints for a new project. Mia was at school, and the house was quiet. He thought about the past 10 years, the nights spent in his garage, the endless hours of doubt and fear. He thought about Sarah, and he hoped she could see what he had built, what he had protected. The Mustang had been junk to everyone else, but underneath it had been a promise, a refusal to let them win, and in the end it had changed everything.